Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Rachel Bussman, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care advice and resources, all online and available to everyone. We're here for you wherever you are. Telehealth resources, including diagnosis and treatment of mental health and learning disorders, group programs for anxiety, mood disorders, ADHD, and more, remote neuropsychological evaluations. And for more, please visit us at childmind.org/telehealth to learn more. Just as a reminder, if you're tuning in for the first time, you can type your questions now or anytime during the broadcast so that we can answer your questions as we talk today about self-care and the marathon, not the sprint. So I'm looking forward to getting started. I'm looking forward to talking with you about the questions that you have. And so some of you have already sent in some questions, so we're going to get started right now. So the first question, I think, is a great one to start with because it is, what is self-care anyway? I will admit that I often thought of self-care as taking a spa day or something very luxurious. Maybe you've heard me say this before, and I think my definition of self-care has really changed over the past 3 and 4 months. It could be taking a spa day, or it could definitely involve luxuriating and enjoying lots of time to bask in the sunlight or things like that. But really what we're talking about right now is nourishing the mind and the body and your health and mental health during a time of stress. So I'm going to practice some self-care while I take a drink of water. So really during times of stress and when we're in sort of chronic fight or flight, which is what happens when we're in a really stressful situation and sort of for a prolonged period of time, it's important to take care of the mind and body. And when we say that, we really don't mean it in a hokey way. We really mean that it's important to do this daily. And so when we say daily, it means ways to take care of yourself so that you have more bandwidth to give back to whatever important relationships are in your life, whether it be your relationship with work, your relationship with your children, or your spouse or partner, or elderly parent or neighbor, or whatever the case may be. So when I think of self-care, I think of a few things. I think of very important things that maybe I don't think of as self-care, but should. For example, you guys all know who've been tuning in and talking to me over the past few months, this is not juice. This is actually flavored water because I think it goes down a little easier when it's flavored. And I refill this a couple times a day. And I will tell you that I'm much more likely to actually drink it when it's sitting here on my table, because then I will actually stay hydrated. And those are some of the things. And so it is really important to do small things like that. Another thing that maybe, again, someone else might not be their cup of tea, but I happen to have really nice flowers in my yard, and I cut some and put them on my table. And my son often asks me, why do you do that? And I'm like, well, it makes me kind of happy. It makes me smile, and it gives me some positivity to my day. And so I have a couple questions already coming in. And so I actually want to get to those because they're more important than questions that I might come up. And so some of them are really tough ones, but I thank you for bringing them. So how can I look after myself when the demands of my children, with also the demands of my children, right? You might be, one child is grieving for his mother, or one has ADHD and autism. And so what I would say is it is really important to look after yourself, even when you're giving. And one of the reasons why is that the risk for what's called burnout is so great when we're taxed, right? And so for this person, and I never use names because I want to protect a little bit, I would say it doesn't mean you necessarily are going to take long bubble baths because you might not be able to do that. But it might mean, depending on the age of your child, or if you have children with special needs and have any interventionists working with you, it might be as things are opening up a little bit, or as maybe you are working with interventionists, or allowing a neighbor maybe to come in your yard and play with a child at a distance so you can go and rest, or so you can go and take a shower, right? I think it's very difficult when you're looking after a child, any child, or a child with special needs. It's also equally difficult if you're looking after a an elderly parent, or just who has their own needs in their own right. So I think a couple of quick tips that I would say for that particular person would be to find really small ways to take care of yourself. And so some of those things might be to make sure to be hydrated. Also, another thing I think is really hard, but I'm just going to say this to this person, is to accept help. So if someone says, you know what, like, I wonder, can I bring you a meal? Can I drop something off at your house? And maybe you're thinking, well, I can do that for myself. I don't really need to accept help. I would say a really very brave thing to do is to say, that's really great. Yes, I would love if you dropped a meal by my house. So I think accepting help and just finding small moments where you might be able to, if you have a child who can entertain themselves or is with an interventionist or anything like that, taking those small moments. I'm so glad my friend told me that she's going to drink more water too. I like the flavored water idea a lot. It works. I tried a new one today. And so another one is, I'm worried about my child's social development during this pandemic. What should I do to help her develop without exposing her to people? And so I think that's a really great question. I think parents do really worry about a child's social development, and I've heard of development at a younger age that people are worried about. And I think it's important to remember that this is a snapshot in time. And so if, your children, even though are not interacting right now with other kids, they are interacting with you, and they are interacting, right? So reading books or reading a book with another friend over Zoom isn't the same as having a play date, but it is something. And so it is important to just keep in mind that there are ways to stay social and have social development while still knowing it's not the same as having a real live play date or being at the park, but still being able to expose to people, right? So there are also, again, we want to get our kids off screens, but there's some great things on like on PBS, or like things like Daniel Tiger or Sesame Street that talk about the pandemic, talk about how to stay connected and be a good friend, even sort of at a distance. So I definitely think having regular, brief Zooms or calls, or even if you do take a walk in a neighborhood, waving and practicing doing those things. Those are really, really important. I see a lot of questions coming in, so I'm super excited to answer them. One person is saying, my child already has anxiety about school. He's 9, turning 10. My son too. How do we slowly introduce back into his life in September? So also a really good question. And thank you for asking that, because the way you can start to introduce it is just by talking about it now. So our inclination is often to say, I'm not going to answer, I'm not going to even really think about this now because it's just the anxiety is so high. But even just saying, let's pretend this child's name is Jackson, to say things like, I know that you get really, really scared. Or if this child already has anxiety about school, you guys have probably talked about it. So I know that X makes you nervous. And it's June right now, but it's never too early to talk about things. So when you drive past the school on your way to a supermarket, you might say, oh, hi, school. Well, it's good to see you. And if your son or daughter says, I'm not going back there, that's a time to say, that's interesting. Like, let's talk about it. Tell me more, right? I think having touch points with other people can also be helpful, right? So if you have classmates, even if you don't know if they're going to be in your class, having socially distant play dates, if that's safe and possible in your town, or even just having Zooms or having any kind of interactions can be helpful. So your teachers for next year, you might not know who they are, but if you know who some of them are, reaching out to the school and saying something like, hey, can you send us the names of teachers? Or, do you have any pictures of the classrooms? I think any things to get used to it is helpful. I also think that, we've talked a lot about telehealth. So I think if you are really worried about your child and their anxiety or any other disorders, you should reach out to a provider who can provide telehealth. we do provide telehealth, and many providers do. But some good books that I actually really like are the What to Do When You books. And so one of them is What to Do When You Worry Too Much. And it's actually a great book that's kind of like a CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy workbook that you can, I wouldn't just give it to your child, I might do it with them. And it talks about like worries and how worries grow and how they can get bigger and how you can face fears. The author also has one on what to do when your temper flares, what to do when you dread your bed. So there are a couple really nice ones in the self-help kind of area that could be things you could maybe do ahead of time. But I think the first thing is talking to your child about what he or she is worried about so that you have a better sense of what those things are. Sometimes we anticipate what our child's going to be worried about, and actually it might not be what we thought, right? So they might be worried, am I going to remember math? And you're thinking they're worried about getting sick. So let's see if we have some other questions in here. I got a wave, so wave back. I got another question that I think is really a really good one. So one is, I feel really guilty that I can't commit to anything for long. Should I be exercising or cooking or cleaning out closets? I just don't know what I should be doing. So this is kind of back to our self-care talk, which is to say that, first of all, what fits for one person doesn't fit for another. So my sister is a master organizer, and I every day have a fantasy that that's going to be me, and I just have come to terms with the fact that it's not. And so I don't think that cleaning out my closets is in my pandemic plan. However, reading is. And so I've been actively reading, and sometimes people will say, well, when do you have time to read? And I'll say, well, when I'm making coffee in the morning and I get up pretty early, because I am happening to get up pretty early, sometimes I have about 20 minutes, 30 minutes when I can read, and that's when I choose to do that. So I think rather than kind of beat yourself up for the things you might not be doing, pick one or two things that you could be doing and that would be enjoyable, and treat that as your self-care. Now, back to the person's comment before, which is like, I have a lot of things that I'm managing, and I don't know that I have a lot of time to do all these self-care activities. Maybe taking up cooking or learning another language or reading isn't what you have in mind. Maybe it's doing a little bit of stretching every day. It's drinking your flavored water. It's maybe going on a walk. Maybe trying to take some people up on socially distant babysitting for those who are old enough to be looked after at a distance. So it's finding what works for you. And then, to me, I think social media can be nice because we're using it right now and we're all communicating and we can wave at each other and ask questions and high five other people's good suggestions. But on the other hand, there's a little bit of like looking over at someone else's, Facebook page or Instagram feed and being like, wow, that person's doing that. And then feeling a little bad. Oh, maybe I should be doing that. And what I would say is that you got to take that with a grain of salt. A picture on social media or on someone's Instagram feed or Facebook feed is a moment in time. And I wouldn't say that you should judge someone negatively for what they're doing. I think it's awesome if someone cleans out their closet or they set up an obstacle course in their backyard. But it's also equally fine if you need to get work done and you turn on the television and have your child watch a show. Like, there's just reality to everything. And so it's important to just remember that there's certain things in snapshots. So someone mentioned something called dissociation. And what I would just say that if dissociation is not a common thing, but can happen. And what I would say is that you definitely want to talk with a mental health provider, especially if dissociation has been diagnosed, and really get some very clear-cut strategies for how to deal with that, because dissociation can happen in the context of a variety of different mental health presentations, and we want to just make sure to keep it to stay on the forefront of on top of it, and just knowing and remembering that telehealth is really available in a lot of different places. So I'm looking here, I'm saying hi to someone who's asking for any tips trying to homeschool a very distracted and uninterested 11-year-old who takes a very long time to do work while trying to entertain a 2-year-old who's craving my attention the most, single mom with no outside help. So First of all, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being open and transparent enough to just put this on there. And then I would say a couple things. One, be kind to yourself. So you're trying to homeschool a distracted and uninterested 11-year-old, and you want to be forgiving with yourself and forgiving with him or her. So one is, he or she is probably over this at that point, right? So we're all kind of just done with this, right? It feels just very taxing. You might sit down with that 11-year-old and say, hey, I need you to be on my team here. And you are 11 and I want you to have fun. So I want you to tell me 3 things that are really important to you every day. And maybe he or she is going to say, let's just say he is going to say, FaceTiming with my friends, playing with my Legos, and maybe having some time alone without my 2-year-old brother or sister around. And you might say those are really important things. So I also need your help with a few things. I need you to be able to do X amount of work, and I need you to be able to help me by doing that on your own, and maybe setting up sort of a negotiation and some teamwork. Like, we have this 2-year-old, we got to help take care of this 2-year-old, and sometimes you can't have my attention, and I want to give it to you, but I can't give it to you when the baby needs to eat. So let's write down some things that are like top priorities. But also, if you're homeschooling and you're working with any teachers, letting them know that you're doing this without any help and that you need a break. So you might say something like, hey, we got 5 things to do, but we need to prioritize 3. So can you help me know which things are the most important? Because we're just not going to be able to get them all done. And I will tell you that I've talked to many people, not just single parents, not everybody in a particular area or state or country. Lots of people are saying, I just can't do all of these things, so I need to pick 1 or 2 of them. So I think engaging your 11-year-old in a conversation about how to motivate him or her to work towards something that would be rewarding and motivating for them, and also helping them be on your team. Then I think the other really important part is when you notice your 11-year-old staying focused for 5 or 10 minutes, making sure you let them know, because what ends up happening is we tend to pay attention to the times our children are doing things we don't want them to do, and we forget to pay attention to the times that they're doing something we do want them to do. So if you pass by your 11-year-old and he's reading and has been reading for like 5 minutes, maybe don't interrupt him, but then after, you might even write on a sticky note, a little note that says, hey, you did an amazing job staying focused for those chapters. You might think that it's not needed, but actually that kind of praise goes a really, really long way. So I hope that was a helpful answer. You're welcome to the person who just said thank you. I would also say one of these questions that has come up is, I think, a good one, which is, how do I get my husband to take his own self-care seriously? He's burning out, but he doesn't seem to realize it. Well, that's also a really interesting question. I think the first thing is I actually did one of these Facebook Lives on self-care maybe a couple months ago, and had found an interesting article in like a men's health magazine about men and self-care. So you might just Google an article about men and self-care, because sometimes it's really, you don't want to send an article about like women and self-care, because it might not feel very relevant to your spouse. Much like you wouldn't want to send your older parent 10 tips for 20-year-olds for self-care. So you want to try to appeal to the person's, what's going to appeal to them. But you might just remind your spouse, you know what? Self-care is for everybody. And, we need to get more sleep. We need to make sure that we are eating. And like, I'm not telling you that you need to do my self-care thing. So like last night I happened to have a virtual book club, and I actually wasn't feeling super energized to do it because I was a little tired this week. But I said to myself, you know what? This is something I committed to, and it's probably going to end up being fun. And I did it, and it was really fun. But that maybe isn't what's for my husband, but maybe something else is. So you want to offer some suggestions, and maybe give some, say, hey, don't take it from me, but like, I don't know about you, but I saw this really great article in Men's Health. I printed it for you so you could take a look. So these are all great questions, and I always get so excited when we have engaged participants. Please remember that if you want to go back to this later, or you want to share it with a friend, we record these and we archive them. So you can go to childmind.org/coronavirus and find it. I just want to thank you all for joining me. I hope it was helpful. And remember, we're here every day to support you during this extraordinary time. The Childmind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. So please visit us at childmind.org/telehealth to learn more about the incredible variety of remote telehealth resources we have available for you during this time. Thank you and have a good day.